I worked for years to build a life of my own. My sister believed she was entitled to everything I earned. When I refused to give her my house, my family chose her side. What happened next destroyed more than just a home. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. My sister tried to burn my house down after I refused to hand it over to her. When my parents begged me to forgive her, I refused and let the police handle it instead. After that nightmare, I spent 5 years saving every spare dollar, finally bought my own place, renovated it with my own hands, and honestly believed my life had finally found solid ground. What I didn't realize was that my family viewed my stability as an invitation. Before everything literally caught fire, I need to explain how it all started. My name is Ethan. I'm in my late 20s and work in operations management at a mid-sized company. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady. Long days, constant problem-solving, keeping systems from collapsing. That's been my role at work and honestly in my personal life too. I've always been the one who handled things. In my family, that translated into being ignored. My parents, Gregory and Catherine, treated me like I was born self-sufficient. If I struggled, they assumed I'd sort it out. No check-ins. No concern. My younger sister, Chloe, on the other hand, was treated like fragile glass. Everything about her needed protection. Every mistake was excused. Every bad decision was praised as brave or misunderstood. If life got difficult for her, it was considered unbearable. I stopped hoping for fairness a long time ago. After half a decade of saving relentlessly, skipping vacations, eating cheap food, working overtime whenever possible, I finally bought a house. Nothing fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of town. Most people wouldn't have touched it because it needed serious work, but I saw potential. The paint was peeling in sheets. The floors were scratched beyond recognition. The kitchen cabinets were warped so badly you could see daylight through the gaps. But it was mine. No landlord, no roommates, no shared walls. For the first time in my life, I felt relief. Like all the sacrifice had finally built something permanent. Renovating became my second full-time job. I'd finish a 9-hour shift, come home, change clothes, and immediately start fixing whatever needed attention. I watched endless tutorials until my eyes burned. Some nights I passed out on the floor surrounded by tools. My body ached constantly. Weekends were reserved for the big projects. Ripping out floors, rebuilding the bathroom, fixing the sagging deck. My friend Marcus helped whenever the work got too heavy. We'd been close since high school, and he understood my family dynamic better than most. He joked that the house was proof I survived years of being invisible. He wasn't wrong. When my parents finally visited, their reaction was muted. My father looked around and casually said, "You've always been handy," as if restoring a house alone was inevitable for me. My mother smiled and said it looked nice. Not impressive, not incredible, just nice. They meant well, but it felt like they were checking a box. If Chloe had done the same thing, there would have been a celebration, speeches, maybe even a party. They still talk about her wedding like it was a historic event, years later. I eventually learned how much money they poured into it. Meanwhile, when I mentioned how hard the down payment had been, they said they wished they could help equally, but Chloe needed it more. Apparently, need only exists when it's hers. I didn't buy the house to impress anyone. I bought it so no one could take it from me or reshape it to suit themselves. When I finished the major renovations and stood outside looking at it, I didn't feel proud. I felt grounded, secure. That sense of ownership turned out to be temporary. To me, it was my home. To my family, it was unused space. That difference is where everything unraveled. I planned a small housewarming, maybe 10 people, family, Marcus, and a couple coworkers who helped move furniture. Casual. Pizza, folding chairs, nothing fancy. Chloe arrived early with 12 people I didn't recognize. They flooded into the house like they belonged there. Before I could react, my mother clapped her hands and praised Chloe for bringing energy. When I tried to speak, my father cut me off. "It's family, Ethan, don't be strange. More people means more love." It didn't feel like love. It felt like an invasion. Chloe acted like the host. Her son Oliver was dropped onto the floor immediately, running wild through the house. Her guests wandered freely, opening drawers, commenting on things that weren't finished. Her husband Gavin came in last, surveying the house like an investor. His approval-filled nod irritated me more than anything else. Chloe began making comments disguised as jokes. "Wow, Ethan, 3 bedrooms, planning a bachelor compound?" She laughed. I didn't. "What are you even going to do with all this space? Talk to yourself. Must be nice having 0 responsibilities." A few people laughed awkwardly. My father chimed in. Well, she's not wrong. You do have extra space. My mother added, maybe this will finally make you think long-term. They talked like I'd bought a toy, not a home. Chloe pushed for a house tour. She led it, opening doors like she owned the place. In the first bedroom, she smiled and said, this would be perfect for Oliver, look at the light. Gavin leaned against the doorframe. Yeah, this really fits our needs. Our needs. Marcus stayed close to me, watching everything carefully. Oliver dragged a toy across the freshly refinished floors. I'd spent weeks on them. Nobody stopped him. In the kitchen, one of Chloe's guests opened my fridge and asked if there were more drinks. When I asked him not to, he laughed and said Chloe told him the house was basically shared property. Chloe rolled her eyes. Relax, it's just family. Marcus muttered something dark under his breath. Then Chloe clapped loudly, silencing the room. She stood in my living room and pulled out a folder. I have an idea, she said brightly. I asked what she was talking about. She ignored me. Oliver needs a yard and stability. And since you have all this unused space, Gavin and I found a solution. I crossed my arms. You transfer the house to us. Silence. Gavin added, your mortgage is manageable. We've already planned how we'd use the rooms. I cut him off. You're talking like you own it. We're just being realistic, he said. A family needs space more than a single guy. Chloe placed papers on the table. You sign it over, you can live in the basement once we finish it. My blood boiled. I'm not renting my own house, I said. She waved it off. Pride doesn't matter more than a child. Then came the numbers. They'd pay less than half the mortgage. I'd cover the rest. I laughed in disbelief. This is helping family, Chloe said. If you refuse, you're choosing money over blood. I pointed to the door. Get out, she gasped. Yes, get out. Everyone left. That's when my home stopped feeling safe. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. Chloe insulted me, guilted me, threatened me. Gavin texted like a landlord planning renovations. I blocked him. He found another number. Chloe posted lies online, claiming I kicked out a mother and child. People believed her. My father called and asked me to apologize. My mother minimized everything, even after I sent proof. My father finally said, you're being arrogant, son. You're so rigid, just be the bigger person. That almost made me laugh. She tried to take my home. How did that somehow make me the villain? Neither of my parents answered after that. Silence was their choice. Marcus came over that evening. I handed him my phone and let him read everything, every text, every voice message, every attempt to twist reality. He didn't soften his words. This is harassment, he said plainly. You need to document all of it, screenshots, timestamps, everything, and you need security. People like this don't stop just because they feel embarrassed. There was something unsettling in Chloe's messages. Not just entitlement, conviction. Like she had rewritten reality in her own head and decided she was owed my life. The next morning I installed cameras. Doorbell camera, backyard camera, motion lights, new locks, nothing extreme, but enough to give me peace of mind. I stopped opening the door unless I checked the feed first. Everything uploaded to the cloud, which helped, but nighttime footage was mostly shadows and movement rather than clear faces. Still, it was better than nothing. When Gregory and Catherine found out, they reacted like I'd installed razor wire. You're escalating this, Gregory said. You're treating your sister like a criminal, Catherine added. This is excessive. No, I replied, this is protection. They refused to see the difference. Family dynamics shifted almost immediately. I stopped attending gatherings. Relatives who only heard Chloe's side started acting distant, judgmental. Texts came in repeating the same lines. Families shouldn't fight over houses. She just wants security for her child. You could have handled this better. No one acknowledged that the security she wanted came from years of work I did alone. Worse, rumors spread that I had lost control at the housewarming. Gavin told people I threatened him, which never happened. I never raised a hand. I never promised violence. I told him to leave. That was it. By the end of the week, it felt like half my family had turned into Chloe's mouthpiece. Marcus stayed steady. Every day he reminded me not to respond emotionally. They feed on chaos, he said. Save everything. Stay calm, don't give them leverage, I tried. But every day brought another accusation, another guilt trip, another attempt to shame me for not surrendering something I built myself. I already had a work trip scheduled, a simple 2-day conference out of state. But when I locked my door that morning, something felt wrong. For the first time since buying the house, I didn't feel pride when I looked at it. I felt dread, like something bad was moving toward me and I couldn't stop it. Halfway through the second day, my phone rang from an unknown number. I usually ignore those, but something told me not to. A calm voice introduced himself as a firefighter from my hometown. He confirmed my address, then said the words that erased everything else. "There's been a fire at your property." For a moment, nothing existed. Not the conference room, not my laptop, not the notebook in front of me. My first reaction wasn't fear, it was disbelief. I asked if they had the wrong address. They didn't. I grabbed my bag, told my supervisor I had an emergency, and left. The drive back was a blur. I don't remember the roads, only the pressure building in my chest. Marcus called. "One of your neighbors called me," he said. "Your house is on fire, I'm heading there now." When I reached my street, I saw the lights first. Fire trucks, police cars, neighbors standing in clusters. Then I saw it, what was left of my house. The right side was charred black. Windows blown out, smoke still drifting from the roof. My stomach dropped so hard I nearly passed out. What hurt more was seeing Gregory and Catherine standing with police officers, talking fast, gesturing, already defending someone. Catherine rushed toward me. "Ethan, sweetheart, don't panic. These things happen." "These things?" I asked sharply. Gregory jumped in. "We don't know what caused it yet. Don't start accusing people." I hadn't accused anyone. They were already doing damage control. A firefighter approached me, confirmed I was the owner, and explained what they'd found so far. The fire was suspicious. The origin appeared intentional. Someone had been near the side entrance recently. When they asked about cameras, I pulled up the footage. A hooded figure crossed the yard toward the side door. Head down, face obscured. Then the feed cut out. Minutes later, the fire started. That's when Catherine said, "Our daughter lives nearby. She'd never do something like this." The investigator looked confused. "Ma'am, we haven't mentioned any suspects." That said everything. The police asked to speak with me privately. Inside a cruiser, they asked about conflicts, threats, possible motives. I showed them everything. Chloe's messages, Gavin's text, social media posts. The housewarming ambush. "That's extensive," one officer said. They asked for names of people at the party. I told them many were strangers, but Chloe had tagged people publicly. I had screenshots. They documented everything. When I walked back, I saw Chloe nearby. Arms crossed, eyes red, not distressed by the fire, angry that I was cooperating. She immediately performed. "I can't believe you'd let them think I did this," she said, voice shaking. "I'm your sister, I'm a mother." I hadn't accused her. Gavin stood beside her, pretending calm. "Be careful what you tell them," he warned. "You're emotional." I told the truth. Marcus arrived and stood next to me. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "No," I said honestly. Across the yard, Gregory told an officer, "My daughter would never do this." The officer replied, "We're just gathering facts." Catherine stared at me like I was the traitor. More questions followed, more evidence collected. Chloe and Gavin grew visibly tense. Eventually, an officer told me quietly, "I can't say anything official yet, but the timing and damage suggests someone knew you were gone." When I looked back, my parents were surrounding Chloe, comforting her. The evidence pointed to her. They weren't blind, they were preparing defense. The investigation moved quickly. A week later, police asked me to come in. I sat with a detective and an investigator as they laid out the findings. Accelerant residue, matching shoe prints, camera footage, a neighbor's camera placing her car nearby while she claimed to be home, prior threats. When they said charges were being issued, my chest tightened, not from relief but from reality settling in. Chloe was arrested that afternoon. I didn't hear it from police. Gregory called frantic. "What did you do?" he shouted. "They arrested her in front of her child." "I didn't do anything," I said. "They followed evidence." "You could have stopped this," he yelled. "Families don't do this." "She burned my house down," I said. Catherine sobbed on the line. "She made a mistake. She's fragile. She has a baby." "How could she do this to me?" I asked. She begged me to retract statements, lie, confuse timelines. "I'm not lying," I said. Gregory's voice turned cold. "You're destroying this family." "No," I said. "She did." He hung up. Hours later, Gavin posted online claiming Chloe was betrayed by her own brother. He painted her as a victim. People believed him. Then he messaged me from another number. "You crossed the line." I ignored it. He threatened again. I ignored that too. That night, as I stood near the remains of my driveway, footsteps rushed behind me. I turned just as Gavin charged. "You think you won?" he snarled. Before he touched me, I shoved him back. He swung wildly. I dodged, grabbed his arm, and pinned him against his car. He fought poorly, all noise, no strength. Marcus pulled up and saw everything. "Call the cops," Marcus said. I shoved Gavin away hard. He stumbled, pointed at me, shaking. "You'll regret this." "You destroyed your own family," I said. "Leave." He sped off. Marcus shook his head. "Guy fights like a wet sock." I almost smiled. The following days were worse. My parents stopped pretending. Every call was pressure. Fix this. Think of Oliver. Why are you so cruel? I repeated the same answer. I'm telling the truth. Marcus kept me grounded. She did this to herself, he reminded me. Facts don't change because people cry. As the case progressed, my parents grew colder. Short replies, sharp words. One night, after another message from Catherine calling me heartless, I turned off my phone and sat alone in what remained of my living room. The walls were blackened. The air still carried the faint smell of smoke, and yet for the first time since all of this began, my chest felt lighter. I finally understood something I had spent my entire life avoiding. I was never responsible for fixing my family. I wasn't cruel for setting boundaries, and I wasn't heartless for refusing to sacrifice myself to keep others comfortable. I chose truth over guilt, accountability over silence, and myself over a lie disguised as family. And for the first time, even standing in the ruins of my own home, I felt free. Thank you for being part of our community. Your likes, comments, and shares help us bring more unbelievable Reddit family stories every day. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a shocking story.